Israel has backed down after days of tension at one of Islam's holiest sites. It happened after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government installed security cameras and metal detectors at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in occupied East Jerusalem. 2 Israeli police officers and 3 Arab Israelis were killed there earlier this month. Israel said the security measures were meant to safeguard against violence, but the Palestinians saw it as an affront to a religious site. The incident and reaction has once again raised questions over who has ultimate control over the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. And despite Israel ultimately removing the metal detectors and other barriers, the situation has renewed Palestinian suspicions about Israel's intentions. And to get the latest from on the ground, we're joined by Strait Talk correspondent Courtney Kealy from Jerusalem. Courtney, good to see you there. You've been on the ground for a few days now, and this entire episode has been unfolding for about a few weeks now. What is the sense that you get from the Palestinians and the Israelis on the ground?
Well, Ali, what I really get is a sense of resignation. There was a brief moment of victory, a brief moment of celebration on the Palestinian side when those security measures were taken down by the Israelis that were put up in recent weeks. Now, those security measures were just put up by Al-Aqsa compound, and the question was, did the Israeli government have the authority to do that? And it's the Islamic Waqf, the Jordanian government, that oversees it, so clearly those were taken down. But we're back to resignation. There's been violence on both sides, deaths on both sides, and it's just this sort of uptick in violence, and then it calms down, but the situation remains. It's not solved. It seems like an age-old conflict. Palestinians in occupied East Jerusalem claimed victory after nearly 2 weeks of mainly peaceful protests, refusing to pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque until the Israeli government took down newly erected metal barricades and surveillance cameras. Security checks were not the problem. The disruption of the delicate status quo was. Israel has no jurisdiction over the Al-Aqsa compound.
The Temple Mount is open to Muslims, to tourists and to Jewish visitors in the morning, and the security presence will continue over the next 24 to 48 hours.
After Israel captured and annexed East Jerusalem, including its holy sites in 1967, in a move that has never been internationally recognized, Israel allowed the Waqf, an Islamic trust overseen by Jordan, to remain in charge of day-to-day affairs inside the holy compound. The metal barricades and cameras were seen by many as a move by Israel to seize control of one of Islam's holiest sites in the world, as well as another humiliating checkpoint for Palestinians to endure.
فجميعنا يتابع المخططات الإسرائيلية الحثيثة منذ سنوات طوال لتهويد القدس الشرقية.
After the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem and the head of the Waqf Council announced that Israel had conceded, prayers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque were allowed to be attended by the Muslim faithful again.
الاحتلال الإسرائيلي غاشم حاول بأن يكسر إرادة هذا الشعب الفلسطيني أبناء القدس بشكل خاص.
In recent days, despite the grassroots peaceful protests, clashes had continued, but some clashes turned violent as Israeli soldiers used tear gas, stun grenades, and lightly coated metal bullets to disperse the crowds. But after 2 weeks, it didn't end in peaceful prayers, and the rare and fleeting victory for the Palestinians looks gone as they continue to live under Israeli occupation.
Courtney, as we saw in that report, a lot has happened, but is the Israeli side and the Israeli government telling us why they decided to remove the security barriers after so much has gone down?
Well, what you have is Prime Minister Netanyahu is in his conservative party, the Likud party, and the cabinet decided to put those barriers in. Then you had behind-the-scenes diplomacy, phone calls with King Abdullah II of Jordan, as well as other leaders, calls from Muslim leaders around the world saying that Israel had overstepped its reach. Now, those metal detectors came down quietly, as did those cameras, over a series of days, trying to keep it very quiet, and the Israeli government isn't really talking about it. What did happen early on was when the cabinet decided to put them up, apparently Shin Bet and the Israeli police didn't advise Prime Minister Netanyahu to do that because they thought it would incite violence, it would incite tensions and protests, which it did. Then they brought them down. And there's really no talk from the Israeli government. You can tell they just want the tensions to be quelled, and there's not a lot of talk about it. It's just done. But we're still seeing protests, and we're seeing the Palestinians who had that brief moment of victory. Also, the security situation remains in East Jerusalem, and the Israeli security really is in charge. They're not in charge of Al-Aqsa Mosque, but they're in charge of everything around it.
And this can be construed as a symbolic victory of sorts for the Palestinian resistance to get the barriers off the compound, but the occupation still continues, doesn't it?
Well, I think what you really have to recognize what happened over the weeks was that the Palestinians were not listening to Fatah or any political group. It was a grassroots movement where they decided to listen to the religious authorities, and they decided not to enter the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but to peacefully pray outside the compound, outside in the streets, outside the gates of the old city. And that was something we really haven't seen. It was pretty remarkable, and it wasn't driven by any political faction. We'll see if that grassroots movement gets any more traction after this. Now that the Mufti and the Al-Aqsa authorities have said come back to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, it seems like that situation for now has been reestablished, that Israel and Israel's government does not have authority over the Al-Aqsa Mosque, even though it's still a religious site for them with the Temple Mount. It's still with sovereignty according to Jordanian's administration.
Courtney Kealy, thank you very much. Continue the good work. Courtney Kealy joining us from Jerusalem.